How fast could Native Americans shoot arrows from their bows in the 19th century? In 1855, American poet and educator Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published his epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha, which tells the dramatized story of a great chief and peacemaker from the 16th century who helped unite the Iroquois tribes. His story has been depicted in several live-action films, including from 1903, 1913, 1952, and 1997. The original poem includes the lines, "Strong of arm was Hiawatha. He could shoot 10 arrows upward, shoot them with such strength and swiftness that the 10th had left the bowstring ere the first to earth had fallen." How could Native American warriors achieve such feats of skill? The bow and arrow was one of the most important traditional Native American weapons. The date for the introduction of the bow and arrow and its diffusion through North America is a matter of dispute. The bow and arrow appears to have been the principal weapon used during the period 1,000 to 1,200 years before European contact with native North Americans. Most archaeologists, in 2002, date its inception to the 4th or 5th century Common Era. A few would put the introduction of this technology in about 500 before Common Era, and still fewer as far back as 4,000 before Common Era. Given the people's many centuries of experience with the bow and arrow, how could an individual archer learn such fast shooting skills? Training to be a warrior began at an early age. A boy's grandfather made him his first bow and arrows when he was 5 years old. He also started to teach him to follow animals in moccasin tracks and to move silently along trails. In 1893, Dr. Otis Tufton Mason wrote, "The use of the bow was part of the education of a boy. Among the many hundreds of artifacts in the National Museum, a great number are marked boy's bow." Dr. Mason also described the observations of 19th century French missionary and author Emmanuel Dominic. Dominic says that the Indians have trials of skill with arrows and will often keep 10 in the air at one time. Such games are also described in the 1980 book American Indian Archery. The 19th century traveler and painter George Catlin and other early observers mentioned the game of trying to keep as many arrows as possible in the air at once, now called the Hiawatha shoot because it is also found in Longfellow's poem. The 2016 book Survival Skills of the Native Americans adds details as to how one of the shooting games was played. There was a contest favored by the peoples of the prairies, generally those who employ the short bow. The contestants assemble a short distance from the village. Each entrant puts up his ante in order to compete. This might be a robe, a shield, a pipe, etc. Then each step forward in turn, shooting his arrows into the air. The aim is to see who can get the greatest number of arrows from the same bow flying at one time. The trick is to elevate the first arrow so that it is airborne for the longest time possible, and while it is flying, the others are discharged as rapidly as possible. He who succeeds in getting the most arrows in the air at one time is the winner and is awarded the goods staked. These skills were useful when hunting American bison or buffalo. Watching plainsmen hunting buffalo in the 1830s, the American painter George Catlin estimated that 15 to 20 arrows could be launched within a minute. Only repeating firearms could match that rate of fire. A Western observer watched the Pawnee fire arrow after arrow in quick succession, ere long bring down the huge beasts, and then turn and ride off after another. Fast shooting skills were also used in battle, as briefly described in the 2004 book Making Native American Hunting, Fighting, and Survival Tools. The expert Native American archers would shoot a dozen arrows while their enemy was reloading a muzzle loader. In 1620, English pilgrims from the ship Mayflower learned of native shooting skills when they trespassed on the shores of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. With his quiver slung over his left shoulder, and with the hair on the right side of his head cut short so as not to interfere with the bowstring, a native warrior was capable of firing arrows much faster than a musket-equipped Englishman could fire bullets. Indeed, it was possible for a skilled bowman to have as many as 5 arrows in the air at once. And the pilgrims were forced to take shelter as best they could. Arrows could also be launched from a bow at a far higher rate than balls could be fired from a musket or early types of rifle. So how were they able to shoot that many arrows so quickly? In the 1882 book, Our Wild Indians, Colonel Richard Irving Dodge described how the arrows were held ready to be shot quickly. The wonderful thing about the Indian bow practice is the remarkable rapidity and force with which he can send his arrows. He will grasp 5 to 10 arrows in his left hand, and discharge them so rapidly that the last will be on its flight before the first has touched the ground. American Indian Archery describes the technique in more detail. Several arrows were usually held in the bow hand for rapid shooting. It comes as a surprise to most people that these arrows were invariably held points up. The Indian held the bow loosely, so holding 4 or 5 arrows in his bow hand did not handicap his aim or release. Sometimes for rapid shooting, he even held a couple more arrows in his mouth. The author of the 1991 book, Bows and Arrows of the Native Americans, observed this technique in modern times. Modern Comanche men, shooting their traditional 48-inch bows with 24-inch arrows, usually hold 3 or 4 arrows in the bow hand, points up. These fast shooting skills slowed the transition from bows and arrows to muskets, although it was inevitable. The Iroquois laid aside the ancient weapons as early as 1727, according to Lewis H. Morgan. The guns of that period actually were inferior, in most respects, to the bow. The guns had longer range, and the rifle, at least, had somewhat more accuracy, but they were clumsy, heavy, and had a very slow rate of fire. An archer could discharge an entire quiver of arrows during the time taken to load one shot in the famed Kentucky rifle. Even this famous weapon often misfired, putting its owner in further jeopardy. Sadly, Hiawatha's shooting skills fell out of favor as warfare modernized in North America. Though I'm glad to say, these skills are still practiced today. Thank you for watching. Please like this video and see links in the description below to watch the Song of Hiawatha and read the poem for yourself.